friend Manus here, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about Upper Lough Erne, and in particular about an island on the Upper Lake near the area of Knockninny. And I have a great interest in all of that part of the lake and certainly the islands. But before I do that, I just want to sort of make a comparison here, and I wanted to compare this lady that I'm going to speak about, namely Celia Rose Maguire, to a very similar type of person named Hannah Hoxwell, who lived alone on a very isolated farm in the Yorkshire Dales. And Hannah was probably an unlikely celebrity, and people were fascinated by the story of the solitary woman farmer living a life of hardship on a remote Pennine farm without electricity or water. And so the story goes on. And I just wanted to sort of compare somebody else in a similar situation. And so today I'm going to talk, as I say, about another very similar lady, namely Celia Rose Maguire, as I've just said, living on a lonely island on Upper Lough Erne in the county Fermanagh. Again, a solitary woman farmer living a life of hardship on a remote island without electricity or water in those early days, revealing her love of the islands and her animals and reluctance to give up her beloved home to move to the mainland. So that's a little introduction, and now I'm going to move to the next little bit. I'm going to give a little background to Celia and to the island as well. Celia was a very unique person in very many ways. She was a lady, firstly, handicapped, her lifetime born with an invalided person, and was a great character in many ways. And I'm going to go to the book, just a little book that I have here as well, which we did a story on, and I want to talk about her life and so on the island. As a neighbouring island, houses closed their doors in the 1940s and 50s. The lights of Inishlaroo or Rabbit Island still shone out across the water to the mainland. Her light was a heartening and welcoming sight as many helpers and well-wishers paddled their way to visit Celia in her declining years. She was one of a few remaining residents on an island on Upper Lough Erne. Her father, Michael Maguire, was born there in 1871 and was one of at least 3 generations to live there. He married Elizabeth Cassidy from neighbouring Townland on the mainland of Aughacillimod in 1907 and had 5 children, 1 son and 4 daughters, of whom Celia was the second youngest. Life was tough and not very rewarding as Michael and Elizabeth struggled to serve and rear their families, something they did admirably. Their home was a hospital. Hospitality was brilliant about it and was a very Christian place where everyone was well received, irrespective of class, colour or creed indeed. It was not the materialistic things of life they could offer, but something infinitely richer in the warmth of their welcome. The family dispersed at one time and passed. Lizzie Agnes went to London while Sarah and Mary went to Belturbet. There they got married to Paddy McCann and Eddie Donoghue respectively. The father died in 1951 and their mother and her son Peter both died in 1963 within 3 months period. This was a heavy cross for Celia to bear, and for over 30 years she braved the loneliness of an island home, a place she could never leave. Her courage and determination was unrelenting, and she was reaping rich rewards with the neighbours who called on her. I mentioned earlier there her father, Michael. Well, Michael, as I said, was born in 1871, and not long after the famine indeed. And as a matter of interest, families living on islands fared out much better than those on the mainland, because being surrounded by water, the blight, the cursed blight as they said at the time, did not affect the crops, as adversely as crops on the mainland. So I suppose that was one consolation, and of course there was an abundance of fish available to them as well. Fish were caught, dried out, salted, and some were put in the chimney to be smoked. On the other hand, there were lots of fowl around the lake, so really no islander starved. They were fully sufficient. So after his death, and the other 3 sisters had moved away, as I've just said, Celia, along with her brother Peter and mother, was left to continue farming on the island. Things were going very well for the remaining 3 of the family, but unfortunately illness struck, and P, or Peter as he was called, in the early 60s. So Celia was left to care for both P and her mother, an ageing mother indeed at the time. And in 1963, Peter and her mother both passed away, which I said earlier, within 3 months of other. And of course this was a terrible blow to Celia. Just to mention at this point, when P was near the end of his life, things became more difficult for the family. And this was because a big frost set in and the lake froze over totally to a depth of 6 to 12 inches of pure ice in places. The neighbours came to the rescue and kept a channel open on the lake for as long as they could, but eventually the frost caught up with them and beat them, leaving these same neighbours, and indeed family, taking the risk of walking on the ice. Indeed, a ladder was used to slid along the ice just in the event that the black ice broke. But anyway, thankfully, never anything happened. And just on that point, at that very time, there were 2 neighbours on a neighbouring island, both the name of Rooney's, who died tragically, indeed, in a boating tragedy on the lake. They were both postmen, and they were rowing back, or trying to row back in the ice to their home, but the ice got thicker and thicker, and they weren't able to move, and people could hear them screaming from the mainland, and unfortunately, when eventually somebody got to them, they were both dead. So that was a terrible tragedy and a terrible shock indeed for people like Celia on the island. So anyway, things went on, and Celia was then left on her own on the island, and she continued her farming, a very small farming. She had 3 or 4 cattle, and which she dearly loved. Indeed, they were almost very much part of the family. And I remember one occasion her saying to me, "I'm going out to milk the cow." So I went out with her, and there she had a little 3-legged stool, and she just set it on the ground and milked away at the cow. And whenever she was leaving with her little can of milk, she said to the cow, "Give me the paw." So the cow just put up the paw and shook. We see it in dogs, where you get the dog giving the paw, but this was a cow. This was a very unusual situation. So then things were going reasonably well until finally tragedy struck again. And in 1977, Celia's house went on fire, and it was a thatched cottage, and of course nobody there but her little dog. So apparently the dog raised the alarm. She was asleep in the cottage, and the dog raised the alarm. He jumped on the bed and woke her up, and she knew there was something wrong. So she struggled out of bed, and she could smell the smoke. So she got out of the house and made it out to the byre, as she called it, the cattle were, and she got in there. She had no telephone, no means of communication at that time. So anyway, the next morning, some of the neighbours saw smoke, and they then made their way quickly to the island, and didn't know what they were going to find. But luckily, in many ways, that they found Celia sitting in amongst the cattle in the shed, in the byre. But unfortunately, the little dog that raised the alarm was gone. And apparently the dog, they reckoned, wouldn't just leave the cottage because it was going to protect the cottage. So that was a terrible, again, tragedy from there, you know. But anyway, we things moved on. The neighbours once again came to her aid with good neighbours who went along immediately, and under the direction of the local parish priest at the time, Father Pat Brady, he coordinated a number of the neighbours and went to the island and immediately got to work on getting materials into the island and getting it renovated again. Now, at that stage, neighbours would have really have wanted her to move to the mainland.
What age would she have been at that time?
She'd have been in her 70s at that stage. So what happened then, there was no way she was going to leave her home.
No.
And she always would have said, look, this is my earthly home, and there will be no other home until my heavenly home. And that was a statement she made on several and many occasions. But anyway, she really was delighted with this and the great work of her neighbours and so on. So I suppose one could say once again that she is raised from the ashes. Celia was back to herself and everything was going again well. She now has a lovely new home, again, which she was so proud of. So once again she took to the oars, rowing friends and neighbours into the island and back again. And Celia was not afraid of the dark on the water. She made frequent trips to the mainland at night, where one could see the flash lamps shining, indicating that all was well. So in other words, whenever she would have brought in the visitors and the neighbours, they had food and drink. She was great for food and drink and all the rest. And then she'd leave them back, and those people that she brought back to the mainland would stand there until she got back in.
She got back in again.
And she then shone the light. So people were very happy then. They could go home in peace,
knowing she was safe.
Knowing that Celia was safe. So that was a unique sort of thing as well. Another problem that she incurred at times was fog. Fog was a big problem on the lake. So, you know, that was something that it wasn't easy, but because whenever you pulled off the shore in a fog, if you row out into a fog on an open lake, you don't know where you're going. So anyway, didn't have a clue where they were going, where you were going, or anything else. But what actually happened in this case was Celia would have, rather than go around in circles in the lake and not knowing where she was, she came up with a plan, and she got small bundles of hay. And she had these little bundles of hay, and as she went out, she would light it, sitting on the top of the water, and then she moved another bit, light it, and this is what they done. And then you could follow the wee
but with the hay not, with the hay not, with the waves, with the hay not float.
No, well, it seemed to work for her anyway.
Right,
but yes, if it was stormy, obviously
yes,
that could happen. But that was a plan that she came up with it, and it worked for her, and it gave her this sort of straight line and got her back to her island. And of course, the other thing that happened in those early days was there was the illegal potching making, of course, on the islands, and but no longer that's not the case anymore. You just go to the supermarket. But anyway, that was a great one, and indeed used to happen on Celia's island as well. So of course the island was a safe place to make it. Of course. That usually you wouldn't get any of the law around on the lakes at that stage. But Celia would never let it be known that there was potching being made on her island, even though it did happen. What else she used to say, she used to say, well, sure, we'll have a wee bit of the crater the night, you see, or the today or whatever. So everybody knew what the bit of the crater was. It was a glass of the good old clear potching. So anyway, the island people, the neighbours again, were very helpful whenever she came to making her hay. The hay had to be made manually, and the local farmers went out and they gathered the hay and they put it in and they brought it into the as they used to call it, the haggard. The haggard. This is a wee area around close to the house, and they built bigger pikes of hay, or stacks.
It's like a stack of hay.
Stack of hay, and that in itself was a big event for the people of that area. That was a full day event, maybe of a Saturday, and all of the neighbours would go there, and there was food and drink and music and everything else, and that ended the summer.
And would the neighbours go from farm to farm and help each other to do that?
Yes, well, of course, that was very much part of it at that time.
Yes,
people did help other, but certainly from the point of view of the island, it was a great occasion. It was like going on your holidays.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember this myself, and it was really was, you know. So that's, you know, the kind of thing that went on the island itself. And again, as I said, the animals were so dear to her and all of the rest. But I suppose we come to the bit where unfortunately Celia herself then fell ill. Again, neighbours in and out, and I myself was one of those she had, just to get back a wee bit maybe, the local community association, I meant to mention this, would have been involved quite a bit in raising funds to install a generator on the island. We did that, and for her, which was immense, great work for those people who did this, for she really was on top of the world once she got her electricity installed, the generator, where she had her television and all the other bits and pieces that went along with it. The telephone was another one which she got installed as well, and I always remember it was Derry Lynn 269, and that was going back a while. And the water was laid as well. That was a big problem as well. The water was, and it was tied to the bottom and into the lake. It was dropped with stones tied to other blocks or whatever. But very often times that during the summer especially, that the big cruisers would come and cut the water pipe, and indeed on many occasions we had to go out and join the pipe together to get her going again. But that was part of it. So that was part of it. So I suppose from the point of view again of her life, she was so interested in people, irrespective of who they were. She loved visitors, and she, indeed in the latter years when people got to know about her, she had numerous visitors from around the world, in fact. And of course, that being an area where there was lots of tourists and all the rest, but she always loved people to call. It didn't matter, you just went up the avenue and you knocked the door and she'd come in, and next thing she'd have the tea going and the drinks and all the rest. And many occasions we've had loads of people from the press and TV going there to get her story. And all of those things were great. And as I said, she talked to everybody. But the one thing that you never mentioned to her, and she warned me this whenever these interviewers or journalists are coming, the one thing they do not ask is my age.
I was about to say, actually, because I just asked about the age, yeah.
No.
You weren't allowed to ask her about the age.
You were not allowed to ask. And I remember well on one occasion bringing in a little German girl. And I remember on the way in the boat, I told her, I said, look, you can ask her whatever you want, but look, for goodness sake, don't ask her age. So that was okay. So in we went, and there was tea, and we were talking, and she was interviewing her and getting various questions put to her. And what did she ask?
Right.
Asked her age. And bang, suddenly that was the end of the conversation.
That was it.
That was it. There was no going back on
She
that
didn't.
one.
That was it. It was over. Goodbye.
Goodbye. That was it. So.
Well, was she? Do you think then she was obviously she was very sensitive about it, or she just didn't?
I don't know what really. It was just one of the things, and it didn't matter about anything else. You could ask her anything under the sun. Don't ask the age. So that's. I don't know why really that was. She's just something, but maybe there's some cases.
Women are.
Some women don't like.
Women don't like.
No, to be asked their age. So there you go. So that was that. That finished the conversation. I told the girl. I said, "Look, I told you." But anyway. So then, as well as that, of course, she had a faithful friend in the form of her dog. She had this sheepdog, and the name was Prince. Prince was just something else. You know, it's amazing how sort of maybe indeed nature, you know, develops, and he understood clearly her wants and what he could do for her, and he certainly did that. During normally the summer, the relations or neighbours, whoever, would go in and they'd cut the logs for the fire, build them in the wee shed outside. But then during the course of the winter, it was Prince's job to bring in the sticks, bring in the logs into the fire.
And he went out and got the logs?
He went out and got the logs, brought them in and left them at the fire. And again, the other thing that the doggy would do as well, if she needed her cane, she used to call her cane her walking stick. And it might be sitting in the corner. So get me my cane or get me my walking stick. So he'd go down and he'd pull it down with the one paw and bring it up and give it to her. Just amazing things like that. The beer was another one. She kept the beer, the cartons of beer down in the kitchen, in the small tiny kitchen. Was
this for visitors, or did she like the tipple?
No, she wouldn't have herself. She didn't drink herself really.
Yeah, just for the visitors.
Everything for the visitors. They had to be treated. So the dog would go down and he'd actually open. He could get the paw in and he'd open the cupboard door, and he'd pull out the carton. You know, maybe 4 or 6 together, and he'd pull them out, and he'd take one at a time and he'd bring them up, and he'd leave them beside her now. Yeah. So she had.
So she could give it over.
She could give it over. Wow. So that was, you know, it was something.
She must have had a special bond with the animals.
No, she had surely, with animals.
But people and animals.
People and animals, absolutely. So, you know, she definitely was unique in so many ways. So that's the kind of life that Celia led on the island, and of course it was always, for us as young people at the time, it was a great treat to get into the island. And
did she love the children? She loved
children. She loved everybody, really and truly. And as I say, didn't matter who they were. She just had that something about her for the great love for people. And that shone out in many ways, you know, and down the years. So we were, sadly anyway, she passed away. I think it was passed away on the 16th of February of 1994, surrounded by her relatives and friends. I suppose she must rank amongst the elite, having lived by herself on an island farm for over 3 decades, when she made when so many had abandoned their rural heritage. And as night was falling on the 17th of February 1994, the sight of a flotilla of boats bearing her mortal remains to Knockninny Pier was unforgettable. And as a lone piper, local man Joseph Gunn led the cortege to the main road and past the old school where there was scarcely a dry eye. It was the end of an era, as a special person had gone to a reward, and there was no longer a light shining across those often murky waters, and the people of the townlands of Acklamad, Knockninny and Cornelec could feel justifiably proud of their association with the late Celia Maguire. And just finally then priest at the time, Canon Liam Gaffney, in his homily on the day of her funeral, gave a most meaningful outline of the social and spiritual path she chose to lead during her 77 years. She was a great conversationalist, and many people who called there were always impressed. He paid a special tribute to her neighbours and to her nephews and their families, who 17 years earlier, when the house was burned, had worked so hard to have it restored. He especially thanked Noel and Anne Humphreys, neighbours, for their unfailing and sympathetic concern for her well-being. And that ends the life of Celia Rose Maguire.
That was amazing. What an absolute fabulous life.
Well, I suppose, yeah, it certainly was, and it's certainly a unique person she was. And indeed, as at the outset where I started, the fact of Hannah Hoxwell. I remember reading this about in her book or something, Hannah Hoxwell, and immediately I compared her with Celia. Two very similar people in their ways, both in very remote areas, and I think Hannah Hoxwell was discovered by a journalist who was out walking the hills, and that's where all that came from. Otherwise, she'd never been discovered. So by Celia, again, she was brought to prominence by all the journalists and different people who, took a great keen interest on her, and the word spread. And she had been on TV a number of times, and different articles written on her as well. So.
And did she? So when obviously she looked after her mother and father. So she never had, and she looked after the farm. So she never had any a career or job outside of that.
No, never. As I said, the only time she went off the island would have been to the shop or to the local post office, or indeed to bring in the water that she used. Even though she was surrounded by water, she had to go for the spring water. So she would have brought that in cans from the mainland,
And it was a rowboat, I suppose. You didn't have.
Oh, absolutely, a 17-foot wooden rowboat, indeed. So there was no motor on it or nothing like that. So.
And no life jackets, I suppose.
Oh, never mentioned. We didn't know anything about them that time.
No life jackets then, yes, no, absolutely. And how far from the mainland was the island? So did it take her 10 minutes, half an hour to get there?
15, 20 minutes. It says probably, to Knockniny Pier, it was probably about 3/4 of a mile, I'd imagine, from across there, But the other, of course, something I didn't mention there, would have been the visit by the local mummers, the Acclimant mummers. And that was another thing that she loved to see coming. We came around Christmas time, and there would have been 2 or 3 or 4 boatloads of people coming and going, and everybody went in on their full costume, straw, and all the rest.
And what is the mummers? What are the mummers? I have no clue.
You haven't? Right. Okay. Well, of course, that's another interest that I would have. In fact, I would have been probably partly to blame for reviving them back in 1988 in our local community centre, which we had just really purchased and opened up, and it was a means of raising funds. The mummers were a very old ancient tradition whereby people, mainly men at the time, came together and dressed in straw, disguise rather, and they went round the local areas to the homes, and they performed a play. It was about, again, I suppose it's an old pagan tradition of birth, death, and rebirth.
Was it springtime or summertime? What season was it? Or was it
season was St. Stephen's Day.
St. Stephen's Day.
Basically, that was the only day that the mummers would have went out.
Right.
At that time in the early days. But then again, whenever we started, we again going to the island, and sometime in January, then we had kind of been adopted nearly by the Fermanagh Council as well to go and represent them as it was a tradition, and we would have went to different places to kind of attend various events.
And it was a play.
There's a play. It's a play about, there's a play in it, and it's about two heroes.
So it's a script. It's like a not a pantomime.
Well, I suppose you could say that.
Scripted in a way.
Whereby you would have had, like, for example, two heroes that, in our case, of course, in Ireland, what would it be? Only St. George and St. Patrick.
Yes.
These are the two guys who came to blows, and but the good part about it was that we had this, within that is a magical doctor, Dr. Good and Sure. So he would have come along, and then he would have cured the guy that wasn't so well on the ground. So
gotcha.
Right. So okay. he would say, look, here comes I, Dr. Good and Sure, this man of a deep and deadly wounds I'll cure. And I can cure the big plague, the wee plague, the plague without the palsy and the gout. So he would apply this medication, and of course your guy would come up and off the ground, and both became friends. It's all about peace and all of that sort of stuff. So that was a great tradition, and still is. We still do that. We, as I say, we revived it in 1988, and again then we have had numbers of various outings, and again we've had others who become involved, and we had outings to different towns, villages, across to Bulgaria and around the world with. So anyway, that was great, and certainly for Celia, she loved that.
She liked that.
That was a big event in her life. She and that was a whole day thing. So we would have went in the morning, and of course spent the day doing our wee play and playing the music. There's music involved, and there's singing and there's dancing. That's all part of this.
And obviously there's food and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
Any amount of food and booze. Yes, of
Sounds
course.
like a really good time.
Oh, very good. It was very excellent.
And Celia liked this.
She really loved it. That was a big, big event in her life.
And then she invited loads of people to come along as well.
Oh, yes, indeed. So the wee kitchen wouldn't hold half the people,
Because how big was the cottage? Because the cottage was like one bedroom.
No, it was two small bedrooms.
Two small bedrooms.
And a wee sitting room or kitchen,
Yes.
Absolutely. You'll see it on the...
Oh, fabulous. And then was there a bath? Well, so it was bathroom, toilet was outside.
They did during the renovations, after the house was damaged in the fire, they did build on.
Yes, and created like a bathroom.
Toilet bathroom
thing.
Where prior to that it was outside.
Yeah.
Outside toilet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A hard life.
Nothing gracious about it, but it was a hard, tough life.
It would have been.
She loved it. She enjoyed it, and people enjoyed her, and so it was great. So we don't have anybody else like that.
No, we don't truly.
Today,
no.
Things have changed.
Things have changed, haven't they?
Absolutely.